Hey guys, it's Jack. I wanted to let you know that we're starting a new push for subscriptions here on Human Events Daily. So make sure that when you're listening to this podcast, you hit subscribe, you download it, and you share it with 5 of your friends. Make sure they're all going and downloading as well, because we need to get the signal out as much as possible. Look, we've done so much over the past couple of years since this show started, and we're only going to do so much more. Let's get it. This is what happens when the fourth turning meets fifth generation warfare.
A commentator, international social media sensation, and former Navy intelligence veteran.
This is Human Events with your host, Jack Posobiec.
Christ is king.
Charlie Kirk deserved to die. Women hold up half the sky. Charlie Kirk deserved to die. Women hold up half the sky. Charlie Kirk deserved to die. Women hold up half the sky. Charlie Kirk deserved to die.
Get the out of here. The audacity of you to come here 1 year after 30,000 people have been taken.
If you thought the murder of Henry Nowak couldn't get any worse, it's now been revealed UK police tried to stage an intervention, painting the 18-year-old victim as the aggressor before the trial of Vikram Digwa. The Sunday Times reports the Hampshire police sought to release a public statement to address what it described as disinformation circulating online while court proceedings were at a critical point against Digwa.
Serious escalation in the Middle East. The Israeli Air Force has struck military targets with new airstrikes, saying they struck military targets in the west and center of the country. We do not yet know the extent of the damage or if there were any casualties. This latest flare-up, though, happening after the IDF says Iran fired missiles at Israel for the first time since a truce was made back in April.
We're like a third world country. Your elections are crooked, and you're crooked, and Meet the Press is crooked, and so is ABC and CBS and CNN.
But Mr. President,
you're one-sided crooked networks. All right, let's call it quits because I've had enough. Thank you, darling. Have a good time.
Mr. President, let's please. I traveled all the way to Wisconsin.
I've sat in the rain with you.
I know.
I've sat in the rain with you for an hour, on and off in the rain, and I've given you enough time. You ought to straighten out your press because you know what?
Mr.
A country can never be great with a dishonest
Listen,
press.
we traveled all the way to Wisconsin for this interview.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard today's edition of Human Events Daily. We're here live on Real America's Voice. Operation Epic Fury now reaching day 100 with Israel and Iran both exchanging a barrage of missile fire over the weekend, and particularly the last 24 hours or so. All of this came as Hezbollah and Israel launched a series of attacks regarding northern Israel and then in the outskirts of Beirut itself. Iran then coming out and saying that an attack on southern Lebanon will be responded to with multiple salvos of missiles. Israel responded to that with their own barrage on Tehran as well as a petrochemical plant. And then you've got the Houthis and even Hamas saying that they want to get back into the fight. This all comes on the heels of big New York Times report regarding Israeli espionage on the United States. It all comes as President Trump has now achieved a sort of mediator role that he's been taking regarding the two sides, saying that he wants to see a deal. He wants there to be a ceasefire. He wants both sides and really all sides at this point to put down their weapons and to begin to get back to the process of peace. This is day 100 of the conflict. And what do we see on one side? We see, of course, Israel, the United States, the Gulf nations, and that's the GCC, the Gulf Cooperative Council. And on the other side is the axis of resistance, the axis of resistance being this Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas conflagration that have joined together in recent years. And that's exactly what Iran is trying to put out, to say that they are defending their allies in Hezbollah, with these attacks on Israel. Iran's ballistic missile capability degraded and yet still intact with the ability to reach out and touch someone, as we would say in the United States military, putting warheads on foreheads. And of course, going back to taxing the Iron Dome and those Patriot missile interceptor batteries. Of course, the United States Navy, it still maintains its presence in the region, as well as the East Med and just outside the Persian Gulf. The Israeli Navy also able to operate in the Eastern Mediterranean at the same time. So the big question is, of course, President Trump, will he be able to pull this deal together? And some reporting coming out, Axios and others saying now that the president has warned Israel that if you launch further offensives against Iran, that you may be doing so alone if they are not done within the confines of the deal. So this is President Trump trying to do everything he can, use every piece of leverage, whether it be military, whether it be diplomatic, whether it be economic, to bring all sides of the warring conflict together to say, we need to find a way to get a path to peace. And that's been President Trump's goal from the very start. The deal, the 14-point plan that had been drafted, I think 2 weeks ago at this point, I've called it a major win. It would be a major win if President Trump is able to get all partners to sign off on that. But just like anything else, of course, getting the various sides in the Middle East to agree to peace has always been the tallest order for any American president. But if there is an American president who could do so, who could bring together the Israelis, who can bring together the Arabs, who can bring together the Persians to at least get to a point of accommodation, that's where the United States can come in and potentially get back to a new status quo, get to a new status quo, not just for the Middle East, but of course, the Strait of Hormuz and the critical petrochemicals and the supplies coming out of there. Jack Posobiec, Human Events Daily, big show today. We'll be right back.
In our way, and our golden age has just begun.
This is Human Events with Jack Posobiec.
Now it's time for everyone to understand what America First truly means.
Welcome to the Second American Revolution.
All right, folks, we're back. Jack Posobiec here, Real America's Voice, Human Events Daily. And as we're following through all of these updates on Iran, creating these situational reports, we want to remind you to stick with us right here on the program to be able to go through all of this from day one all the way through day 100 as far as this thing goes. Hopefully, it's not going to go much further. Hopefully, of course, we're in the camp of hoping that President Trump is able to get to peace. But of course, sometimes those things are hard, even for anyone. As we've seen in the United States, Ukraine, Russia, this has always been a huge issue for the president. He's wanted to bring those two sides together. Ukraine, Russia, hasn't been able to get there even on that front as well. I want to bring on a special friend, a special buddy of mine, Viva Frei. Here's the host of the Viva Frei show. He joins us now. Viva, how are you?
I'm doing good. How you doing, Jack?
Doing well. So, here we are. I want to get your sense. You looked at this as well, just from outside, like most of us. When we're looking at the Operation Epic Fury, obviously the White House wants a deal, but we see both sides flaring up. What do you think? Is President Trump able to get them? Do you think he's going to be able to get them to a deal soon, or are we going to see this break out into a larger, wider conflict?
Look, I would not call myself a geopolitical expert. I have my own opinions, which I think are relatively well-founded based on history and a keen understanding of things. This was always the concern, even from the strikes back in July, where the strikes always lead to broader conflict, or they have the tendency of leading to broader conflict. When those strikes came and went, and declared mission accomplished, the nuclear program obliterated, everyone sighed a deep sigh of relief. Then, you fast forward 6-8 months whenever the next strikes started. And this was always the concern is, if it wasn't accomplished the first time, what's the objective the second time? The problem the second time was a moving goalpost of sorts of objectives so that you couldn't really pinpoint what would be the success. If the success was obliterating the nuclear weapons program, then you could at least say, well, he's achieved that, get out. He doesn't need to make peace in an area, in a region where peace has been as elusive as, the albino rhino. So the issue has been, when it started off as just pinpoint strikes, it's not a war, and now you're 100 days into what Trump himself is referring to as a war, and there are multiple objectives, or at least stated objectives, for the purposes of this kinetic conflict, some of which haven't been achieved, some of which might never be able to be achieved. It becomes an issue as to how you can then say mission accomplished for whatever that mission was. So the bottom line, a lot of us have been holding our breath, crossing our fingers, get out, declare victory, leave the region, come back to domestic issues, because midterms are coming up, and focus back on domestic stuff, fighting the deep state, issues that are of immediate concerns to all Americans. And you're just hoping that we get there sooner than later.
Yeah, no, there's no question. This election, this midterm, is going to be all about those kitchen table issues. And of course, we've seen gas prices come down. Just in my area, they've come down almost a full $1 from where they are. We were seeing $4.50. It was touching at some points, and now it's down to about $3. Actually, saw like $3.65 coming in. So it's getting to be a point where certainly this is going to come up for the elections, and November is, of course, rapidly approaching. Viva, I wanted to switch gears with you real quick, because something that's one of the cases that we've been covering a lot here on the program, and all last week we were talking about this group that I've called the anti-whites, and I've called this sort of menace that's out there. We had the case with Henry Novak over in the UK, and then down in Texas, we also have this case of Karmelo Anthony. And this is a case where it's very strangely, and I think very unfortunate, that it's not on live stream. There are no clips of it coming out. There's no evidence of it coming out. There's no video of it coming out. And I think this is really something where a lot of people have been trying to paint a racial picture on this, but really, and in reality, what it seems to be is that this is a case where it was two individuals who got into an altercation. One raised it to the level of a stabbing. I wanted to get your take. You've looked at this. First of all, does this look like self-defense to you? And second of all, if not, what would the appropriate charge be?
Well, first of all, I've been following this from the day it happened, and the minute it happened, because it was black on white violence, you knew that there would be people who would racialize it, say this is part and parcel of the broader spectrum or demographics of violence. And I said, until there's an element of evidence illustrating or making evidence that this was racially motivated, what it is crime. Crime between two individuals. Crime perpetrated against one individual by another. Happens to be black. You can draw whatever broader, considerations, statistics you want from that. But at the end of the day, there was nothing racially motivating this crime that we know of. So in as much as some people I'll call it the right, there were some people racializing it, black on white violence, the 13% committing 52% of the crime, all that stuff. I was like, that's a separate issue. This right now does not seem to be racially motivated. Come trial time, I've never seen anybody racialize this. This is like O.J. Simpson Part 2 on steroids, except there's no doubt that the individual did it. O.J., he always claimed innocence. This guy says, I stabbed him, I killed him, but it was self-defense. We'll get there in a second. Seeing the crowd, which has the tendency of being African American or black out there, saying we got to stick with each other, and it's a small crowd, and admittedly the people who show up are activists and are going to be activist prone to defend Karmelo Anthony. To see people defending this on racial biases, that if this were white on white it would be treated any differently, it's insane to me. But I've been told, Viva, you're Canadian, you don't understand race relations in America. You don't have the same type of toxic race relations up in Canada. I say we do to a lesser extent. But there was nothing ever racial about this, in my view. I didn't look at it that way. Seeing now, the people out there defending a black kid because they're black. There was one woman saying, we defend our own as you would. It's like, nobody would defend a white kid who stabbed somebody in the heart over some innocuous confrontation at a track meet. And the idea that is the tribalist level of these politics that, taints the way people implement justice at the most, lethal level is foreign to me. Whether or not it's self-defense, I have an open mind. And I said I came into this saying maybe there were extenuating or attenuating circumstances. Maybe there was prior history between these two individuals. Maybe there was something that could explain the way a kid overreacts and I came in with an open mind, waiting for the evidence. I've been following this trial like everybody else. In my view, there is zero chance this is, goes down as bona fide self-defense. The narrative that was being depicted by those outside spreading disinformation to protect one of their own, putting it in quotes, is that Austin Metcalf, his brother, who are 6'5" and they knew jujitsu, they swarmed him, they started hitting him, and he lashed out and in self-defense pulled out a knife that he already had in his backpack for whatever the reason, stabbed Austin Metcalf in the heart, in the chest so hard it pierced his sternum and killed him with a 5-inch blade. Look, that evidence never materialized as far as I know from this trial right now, and I've been following it. This looks like either premeditated, the kid went in looking for a fight and was looking for someone to touch him, put his hands on him so that he could then plunge a knife into his chest. There's nothing in this that smells of self-defense. I think the defense even is realizing this now because a couple of their witnesses have come up and basically blown up the case. Said, one of the kids came back and was basically impeached and said, yeah, initially I said they surrounded him and swarmed him, but that's not really what you see from the video. And that's not really what I saw because I really didn't see anything. So self-defense, my butt. This was a kid who maybe if he had come into this trial and said, I just freaked out, I just panicked, have mercy on me. The expectation or punishment could be different. But this is a kid who's coming in now manufacturing out of whole cloth a self-defense argument as though the proportionate response to being touched, even if that's what Austin Metcalf did, would be stabbing somebody in the chest with a 5-inch knife that you took to attract me for whatever the reason. So no, there's nothing in this, in my view, can be self-defense unless some wild evidence comes up between now and whenever this trial is over. But prosecution has rested its case, and defense seems to be doing just as good of a job as the prosecution here.
Yeah, and I've even saw there was a transcript, and of course we have to rely on transcripts in this because there is no live stream, which I think is sad because in these cases that do become racialized, that do become very highly energized in today's political climate, I think that cameras would actually be very helpful, which is something that I've pushed for quite strenuously in the Tyler Robinson case, which is of course still pending. And first of all, and just to put out there that, because I saw some people tweeting about this over the weekend, that the coach, Austin Metcalf's coach, who I guess tended to him immediately, sort of the first, not first responder, but first guy on the scene right after the stab, he's black. And he went up and said that he didn't think that Austin Metcalf had done anything wrong. He said that this was a common rule, of course, not just for that track meet, but really any sporting event, that you stick with your team. You don't go and mess with the other team or a rival team. It's just not something that's done during sporting events. And that other members of Austin Metcalf's team, who are also black, came up and said that, yes, it was in fact Karmelo Anthony who provoked the situation. And in addition, there was a defense witness who came up, and even the defense's own witness came up to the stand and said, well, it was actually Karmelo Anthony who provoked the incident by refusing to leave after being asked about 15 times. And it seems, and I'm kind of looking over some of the stuff right now, where they're saying that this hand motion that Austin Metcalf made was a push on the shoulder or something, seems very innocuous. But of course, they're saying, oh, well, that was Karmelo Anthony, of course, was saying that was enough for him to be able to defend himself. Of course, it doesn't raise to that level whatsoever of lethal force being authorized. I want to take a quick break. We'll be right back. Jack Posobiec, Viva Fry. We're talking about the latest in the Karmelo Anthony trial. We're right back. Human Events Daily.
You talk about influencers. These are influencers, and they're friends of mine. Jack Posobiec. Where's Jack? Jack, who's done a great job.
For Jack Posobiec, back live for America's Voice, Human Events Daily. Folks, is closing on the election. you will see more and more shocking events happening around the entire world. And right here, talking about day 100 Operation Epic Fury, the turmoil, the tumult that's going on in the Middle East, missiles flying back and forth between Israel and Iran. Of course, the president doing everything he can to try to hold it down. But what we need is to see that, unfortunately, it's not all a coincidence. Now, it's not a coincidence, and I believe it is. Neither should you. Plus, society faces additional challenges: high inflation, mounting debt, rising interest rates, and labor disputes. These factors further strain our economy, with escalating global tension threatening to disrupt vital supply chains. There's a reason why so many patriots preserve their wealth with gold, because it stands as on its own as a beacon of stability. And over the last 5 years, it's almost doubled in value. Regions Gold has done things the right way from the beginning, so it's no coincidence that it earned the highest trust rating in the precious metals industry, 5 stars with Trust Link, and an A+ with Better Business Bureau. Allegiance Gold and I'll protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or you can have it delivered securely to your doorstep. Get the $5,000 in free silver on a qualifying investment when you use protectwithposo.com or give them a call 844-577-POSO. Don't risk your financial future betting against these forces. Act today. Protectwithposo.com. That's protectwithposo.com, and call 844-577-POSO. All right, I want to get back now. We're on with Viva Frei. We're talking about the Karmelo Anthony, the latest updates. And Viva, when we see this going on, this idea that, and so let's ask about this push, this shove. By all accounts, it doesn't sound like it was a hard shove. It doesn't sound like he pushed him very hard. And even the prosecutors are making this argument that Karmelo felt a momentary fear. He was afraid for himself in the moment. He thought that something could happen, not just because of the shove, but because he felt that he was surrounded, again, in this tent that he himself had put himself in. Does being shoved warrant a level of force consistent with what we see here, this stabbing directly in the heart?
I always qualify this. I'm a former Quebec litigator, never done criminal law in the States. Texas has what's known as imperfect self-defense, so that even if your fear of immediate bodily harm was unwarranted or irrational, it can still be argued as a mitigating factor. The bottom line is this. First of all, misinformation, disinformation galore. People initially were saying he stabbed him with a cleat cleaner. Then you hear some people saying, well, it wasn't abnormal to have a knife because, you might have to cut tape when you're doing whatever. My understanding, he wasn't even competing. He went over to the other tent. And if we want to steel man this, some people were suggesting he went over to the other tent because his team didn't have a tent. There was a storm coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So he was just taking refuge, and they told him to leave, and he, took umbrage with that. The idea that this is touch me and I get to stab you through the heart, and highlighting that, it's not like he punched somebody and the kid fell back and knocked his head and died that way. That happens as well. And then the argument is, well, I obviously didn't mean to kill him at all. But then you unfortunately, have to take your victim in the state that they come. This is plunging a 5-inch blade through his sternum into his heart with such force that it penetrates and breaks off bone from his sternum. This was intended to be lethal force. And for what? For what could at best be described as battery, if that. Some people sitting there, oh, he assaulted him, he put his hands on. No, unwanted touching is battery in most places. Assault is you need to cause the person or have the intention of causing the person to fear harm. And the idea that somehow people want to say this is now legitimate stand your ground defense. So every time there's a shove at a track meet at a high school, you have the precedent where you can stab someone to death if you think that you're defending yourself. It's ex post facto justification, an attempt for what is nothing shy of murder. And I appreciate the kid's 17 years old. He's not facing capital murder, so he can't face the death penalty. And at 17, you can make an argument. Maybe not old enough to try as an adult, or sentenced to death. Old enough to try as an adult. Old enough to sentence as an adult. This kid, by all accounts, was looking to provoke something of an antagonistic response, so that he could then do what he did. And if you thought that Austin Metcalf touching his shoulder or pushing him, whatever you want to qualify it, was violent assault, then you leave and you go get the cops and you come back and you charge him with assault. I made the analogy that had Karmelo Anthony, had he said, touch me and I will stab you in the heart, that would have been a bona fide prosecutable threat. So how does it become self-defense when he actually does it? He says, Austin, touch me, put your hand on me, I will stab you in the heart. There is no realm of the universe where that would not be considered a criminal threat. And somehow it's going to become magically self-defense because he actually stabbed him in the heart? It's nonsense.
No, and in fact, I'm reading some of the transcripts now, and even some of the defense's witnesses are coming up and saying these are other, high school, classmates and teammates and folks who were there. And they asked one of the witnesses, have you ever seen people go into other tents? And they said, yes. And they said, okay, but have you ever done that? He said, well, no, I've never done that. But yeah, I mean, it's just, these are the best that they can come up with to try to determine that there was no provocation on the behalf of Karmelo. Because if you lose the self-defense, which to my mind, they have not been able to demonstrate that he was in a situation that called for lethal use of force in self-defense, even under Texas law. And as such, that means it's grounds for the murder charge. Viva Frei, last minute to you.
Well, people have to understand this. He admits to stabbing him. He admits to having brought a knife. He admits to having stabbed him. He admits to having done the actus reus, the act of the crime. And now the only question is, did he, at the time, legitimately fear for his life, even if it was irrationally, and act in self-defense? If this is the new standard, I mean, you are basically giving grounds to murder people for what could at best be qualified as simple battery. And the bottom line, him being under the other tent, asked to leave, all this other stuff. Oh, he didn't have to leave. Austin had no authority to make him leave. This is a situation that could have been escalated by going to the principal, going to authorities and saying, Austin shoved me and I'd like to press charges. And the only joke would be nobody would press charges there. The bottom line, they had to lie about what the video evidence showed because it doesn't show him being swarmed and jumped and beaten by 4 people. And all of the witnesses there say it looked like he was actually provoking it.
No, we remember that as well. Viva, got to run. Where can people follow you, brother?
The Viva Frei on Twitter and Viva Frei on Rumble, vivabarneslaw.locals.com on Locals.
All right, thanks so much. We'll be right back with more from our own Savannah Hernandez, one of our best friends here on Real America's Voice.
Where's Jack? Where's Jack? Where is he? Jack, I want to see you. Great job, Jack. Thank you. What a job you do. We have an incredible thing. We're always talking about the fake news and the bad, but we have guys, and these are the guys who should be getting Pulitzers.
They found out I work for Turning Point USA. And at that point, it got very aggressive and it got very violent. I was surrounded and I had an entire family, a mother, a father, and a daughter who all took turns beating me up. Law enforcement didn't come. I realized I had to walk myself out of this mob that wanted to hurt me. And again, every single time I turned to leave, I was punched, I was pushed, I was shoved, and I ended up being slammed to the ground by a man that was double my size.
All right, folks, we're back. Jack Tobic here, live, Human and Daily Rumors. We're going to have the great Savannah Hernandez here in just 1 minute. But first, we give you a message from people who are very concerned about the homeowners out there in America, because if you are one, you need to listen to this. The FBI has been working about a type of real estate fraud on the rise called title theft. Your equity is their target. Here's how it works. Criminals forge a signature on a single document. They use fake notary stamp and file it with the county. And just like that, on record, they own your home. Using your ownership can take out loans against your equity or even sell your property. And you won't know about it until foreclosure collection notices show up in the mail. That's why I've partnered with Home Title Lock, so you can protect your equity and find out today if you're already a victim. Use my promo code POSO at HometitleLock.com. You'll get a free title history report and a free trial of $1 million triple lock protection. The 24/7 monitoring of your title records, urgent alerts to any changes, and if fraud does occur, their U.S.-based restoration team will spend up to $1 million to fix it. Don't be a victim. Protect your equity today at HometitleLock.com, promo code POSO. All right. Without further ado, I'm going to get Savannah Hernandez back on here. Human Events Daily. Savannah from Turning Point USA. Front. not only you talking about your experiences up in Minneapolis, but you were actually doing live coverage of the protest of your own event while you were there. It's very it's incredible. Tell us about what happened at the Turning Point event, Sav.
Well, thank you so much for having me on, Jack. I always love coming on your show. Well, regarding what happened at WLS this weekend, it was absolutely insane. You know, I love going to our women's event because it's supposed to be the calmest of the year. You know how my Frontlines work goes, Jack. It's very grungy. It is very sometimes violent. And so the women's event is a great break for me to go and just enjoy, being in the calm. However, one of the first things that I saw when I showed up to the hotel was women dressed up as Handmaid's Tale that were walking through the hotel trying to protest a lot of the attendees at WLS. And then on top of that, we had a huge mob of people who were wearing Antifa T-shirts, Antifa imagery that were in the street, fist fighting police officers, throwing water bottles at them, throwing various items at them, hitting them with flagpoles. It was a very violent scene. And again, night one as well, as Erica took the stage to speak, you had a left-winger who came into the building to shout her down. I also heard through the grapevine that security ended up finding a cup of urine that was left under this person's chair after they were done screaming at Erica. So it was one of the most contentious WLSs. And keep in mind too, Jack, that this is an event for women, for children, for again, single women who come and will just try to go and find friends and again have a relaxing weekend. And it ended up being a very violent scene outside. So Antifa more emboldened than ever. And some of the chants that they were stating outside of this event, of course, making a complete mockery of Charlie's death. It's very clear that the left is not apologetic at all or looking to turn down the volume, but instead is continuing to mock Charlie's death and now hurl death threats at every single speaker at WLS and Erica Kirk as well.
No, and I saw this, and it's very clear. I've been on some other media talking about it, and it's very clear to me that the left's program has been to destroy Turning Point USA. So that started with taking out Charlie, which they did back on 9/10. Then it began taking away and chipping away at the Turning Point organization. And of course, Erica, who is the new CEO of Turning Point. So if your goal is to destroy Turning Point, what do? You start with Charlie. Then you move to the next CEO. Then you move to the organization over and over and over. And it's systematic. And I think that's what people need to understand. And unfortunately, when we try to confront these people in good faith, when we try to engage in the debate, which of course Charlie championed having those debates, there are some people who are so far to the left, and I'm speaking about those people who were reenacting the murder of Charlie that were out there. There were people who out there chanting for more murders and more violence and more killing, that we need to take them seriously. They're not interested in debate. They're interested in the violence. They're interested in using and extending these unhuman actions against all of us, against people like Charlie and Erica, with two little kids, and many others of us who have kids. We have families. That's what they're all about. All right, Sav, is that your view looking at this when you were there?
Absolutely. And it's just heartbreaking, Jack, because I feel like a lot of us who have been in the fight after losing Charlie, it was a very devastating loss. And so now having to fight people on factions of both the left and the right that are trying to tear down Turning Point USA has been very frustrating to see, especially when we should be utilizing this energy to kick out rhinos out of the Republican Party who are not, pushing forward the mandate that we gave them. Instead, it does seem like everybody has turned their focus on truly trying to destroy what was left of Charlie's legacy. And again, after we lost Charlie, I realized more than ever that this is spiritual warfare. This is a spiritual battle. But luckily, we're continuing to push forward, and we're continuing to push forward Charlie's legacy, which is what we did this last weekend. And which is what I've been doing every single day since he's passed, going out and highlighting this evil and highlighting just how extreme various factions of the United States have become.
No, and unfortunately, and here's the thing too, is when people look at these guys and you could see them out there, you say, oh, look how thin their arms are, and we can make fun of them and talk about how cringy they are, and Antifa, Trantifa, they're all so cringy and all this. Here's the thing. These people are willing to pick up weapons and shoot their enemies with them because they lack the physical strength, they lack the mental fortitude to be able to engage in any other form of activity or any other form of discourse. They're not interested in anything other than picking up weapons and firing them. And you will see more people be targeted in such a manner if they are not dealt with properly, if they are not smashed properly. And Sav, that's what happened to you in Minneapolis. That's what happened to so many other people recently. The violence that we've seen in Newark and other places where over and over the violence continues. It's not actually dying down. And I predict this summer it's going to get worse.
Oh, absolutely, Jack. And again, I was outside of the Karmelo Anthony trial last week. And what I saw were, again, the seeds being planted for, again, more tension, another race war, more potential riots that could happen if Karmelo Anthony is found guilty. Again, we're living in two separate realities with certain factions of America who refuse to accept the truth, who refuse to accept, again, that we are a country of law and order. And that's why as well, right? Antifa was declared a domestic terrorist organization, and it's why so many people have been calling for them to be treated as such. We wouldn't allow people to declare open loyalty to ISIS and then wear ISIS imagery in the street while attacking women and children and throwing things at the police. So I don't understand why we are allowing Antifa to do that and allowing them to continue to riot and attack our law enforcement officers in front of ICE facilities in New Jersey, in front of WLS in San Antonio. So again, one of the things I talked about this weekend, Jack, was how I was hoping that the left wing after Charlie's death would say, okay, you know what, we've taken things too far. It's time to calm down. And it's time to dial down the rhetoric. But no, they've only quadrupled down on everything. And again, I watched as somebody made a paper mache head of Charlie and came and reenacted his assassination in front of the young women who came to our event to talk about faith, family, and values. So that's what happened this weekend. And terrifying scene. I mean, I saw some of the attendees walk back into the hotel lobby sobbing and crying, Jack, because they were confronted with real evil for the first time. And I wouldn't say they weren't prepared for it, but I think they were quite jarred and shocked by it because they were really seeing it for the first time. So, it kind of hit me as well.
No, it's coming up on a quick break, but you're exactly right that there are some people out there who, when they haven't been out and seen this up close and personal like you have and so many others have, they don't realize how far depraved and how far low and how disgusting these people can become, how completely and utterly unhuman they are. We'll be right back. Jack Posobiec, Sav Hernandez, Human Events Daily.
Jack Posobiec Appreciation Hour. I can say confidently, I think Josh Shapiro would be the vice presidential nominee if it wasn't for Jack Posobiec. And that is, I'm being honest.
All right, folks, Jack Posobiec back live, Human Events Daily, Real America's Voice. We're almost Savannah Hernandez. Sav, you were out there outside and inside the Karmelo Anthony trial where what can I say? It sounds like sparks were flying in both cases there, both inside and outside. Tell us, start with outside. What did you see going on, really with this crowd that was out there?
Well, Jack, just to give you guys an idea of how safe the judge is trying to keep this trial, the entire street leading up to the courthouse has been shut down. There's a curfew where nobody can be on courthouse grounds from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. On top of that, there was a strict gag order put in place and very strict media rules regarding, how this entire trial could be covered. However, you have still had the Carmelo Anthony supporters who have shown up in great numbers every single day of this trial. And Jack, I have covered a lot of protests. This is my first time covering a high level trial, but I've covered a lot of protests. And this is the most aggressive and violent rhetoric I've ever heard from a protest group. Now, the first day that I got there, I went and I just tried to talk to them, right? Why are you guys here? Why is this important to you? And they acted like I was trying to fight them. Another local reporter went up to this same group, tapped one of the leaders of the chants on the shoulder, and keep in mind they're chanting things like "We decree Carmelo Anthony will be free. We have to protect our black youth too." Essentially, everybody in the Carmelo group stating that he is unequivocally innocent. None of them are following the trial. None of them are following the facts of this case, but they are outside of this trial every single day, stating that Carmelo Anthony is undoubtedly without any look into the trial, he's innocent. That is what these people believe. They've been very aggressive with the media. They will not speak to anybody that they deem unfriendly media, which is basically everyone. Last week, you did have a veteran who showed up in a wheelchair, right? He had a couple of flags flying, multiple American flags, one Confederate flag. This resulted in members of the Carmelo supporters stating that if they were close enough to him, they would push him into the grave, that he was going to be the next Metcalf, and that he was going to be pushing up daisies, and that the only good cracker is a dead cracker. So this is some of the rhetoric that is happening outside of the Carmelo Anthony trial, and it was very jarring to witness, Jack, because again, I've covered all sorts of protests, and typically you can at least have a conversation with these protesters to understand where their mindset is at. But with these guys, they will not speak to people. They will not explain why they think Carmelo is innocent. I was able to get a first interview with one of them, and I basically asked, hey, will the black community accept evidence if it shows that Carmelo Anthony actually didn't act in self-defense and that he did stab Austin Metcalf and committed a murder? Would they accept that? And this woman basically stated that we are going to stand with ours regardless of what the evidence states. And then I was able to speak to another man who called himself a minister. And he basically stated that he was outside of the courthouse praying because what this courthouse represented was legalized racism. So a little idea of what's happening outside of the courthouse. You also have Dominique Alexander, who's been a spokesperson for this family. Let's keep in mind that he is somebody who has been at the forefront of pushing racial tensions and utilizing high profile cases like this one and twisting and distorting the facts to make it seem like Carmelo Anthony is simply being prosecuted because he's black.
Well, and Sav, so you've been also covering the inside of the courtroom. Wanted to give us, what's your take on the latest there? I was talking with Viva Fry as well, that a number of the witnesses who have testified on behalf of the prosecutions, who testified against Carmelo Anthony, are themselves black, including the coach, including many of his teammates. So it really doesn't seem like, on the face of this was a racial incident, at least from Austin Metcalf's side. And of course, I would point out as well that for those protesters saying that, oh, well, he was only asked to leave because he was black, that clearly Austin Metcalf did not ask any of his black teammates to leave the tent either.
Exactly, Jack. Again, you have bad actors that are outside of this trial that are trying to essentially spread a fake narrative regarding what is going on with this. This has nothing to do with race, and it has everything to do with the fact that Carmelo should not have been there to begin with. Again, one of the first things that I noticed when I was inside for jury proceedings is how Carmelo Anthony shaved his head, which gave him an even more youthful appearance. I do feel that the defense is doing everything in their power to try to make him look as young and as innocent as possible in this case. Because again, they've called up witnesses and it doesn't seem like they have been able to make that self-defense argument very well. Another thing the defense is going to try to bring up is that Texas is a stand your ground state. However, that argument has completely fallen apart. So a little idea of what it's been like inside and outside. Also, just kind of some details that I was hearing regarding how quickly the judge wants this to be wrapped up. They're hoping to have this trial wrapped up by June 12th. I heard this from law enforcement sources on the scene, which is why we saw a Saturday proceeding. That's not typical. However, this judge really wants this to be done very quickly. And there's also what I'm hearing, going to be no planned breaks before closing arguments, and the judge is also prepared to keep these trials in session until 6 p.m. every single day because they want this process moving as quickly as possible. So a little idea there from on the ground.
Well, that's incredible. No, that's a, by the way, incredible exclusive there about pushing forward, and in fact that would explain why they had this Saturday of testimony, which is something that, having covered trials at the federal level, state level, just I hadn't been expecting myself, but given that time frame, that does make sense. Sab, looking at the evidence, to your mind, is you've been in a number of incidents involving violence. You've never provoked one of them at all in your life, and yet in this instance, that's the very question that's being decided. When you're looking at the different pieces of evidence that have put out, the differing narratives that have come up, have you seen evidence that shows that Austin Metcalf provoked this situation, or was it in fact Karmelo Anthony?
Jack, every single witness that's come forward to the stand has stated, and again, this is not my opinion, this is the facts, this is what the witnesses are stating, that it was Karmelo Anthony that provoked Austin Metcalf. It was Karmelo Anthony who was asked to leave 15 times. It was Karmelo Anthony that provoked Metcalf. And it's just, like I said, frustrating because you still have people outside of this courthouse that do not care about facts of the case and are trying to spin this into a racial thing. And one of the first ways they did this was by stating that this is an unfair trial because there are no Black jurors that are seated. However, let's keep in mind there's a very heavily Hispanic and Asian population up in this northern part of Texas. So that doesn't mean that there are no minorities on the jury. It just simply means there are no Black jurors. And of course, those jurors were struck for a reason. This is how the legal process plays out. However, Dominique Alexander has again been pushing this narrative that Karmelo Anthony is not getting a fair trial because he's Black, that the legal system is racist, that he's been fighting white supremacy since day one, despite the fact that Anthony and his family were able to raise $500,000, despite the fact that a judge lowered his $1 million bond to $250,000 after he cited financial difficulties. And then it was found out that the family was living in an almost $1 million home. The facts of this case show that race has nothing to do with this. White supremacy has nothing to do with this. The facts of the case show that Karmelo Anthony was the aggressor and that he very much seems to be the one at fault here. All of the witnesses, their story is the same. They're all corroborating one another. And it really does seem like the defense is not having a good time in this. So we will see what ends up happening and what the verdict is later this week. Of course, that's up to the jury, Jack. But from what I'm seeing, what everybody is seeing in the facts of this case, it very much seems like Karmelo Anthony was in the wrong here.
Well, we will certainly be following this and through the end of the week. Sav, where can people follow you?
Go follow me on X at Sav Says and YouTube at Sav Says as well.
All right, Sav, and thank you so much for being on. And as always, make sure you stay safe out there. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, you have my permission to lay ashore.